Hello, everyone, and good morning, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe, and joining me today is another author making their official debut here on the channel. My guest today captivates readers with fast-paced sci-fi adventures filled with puzzles, mythology, and romance. Her female-led stories explore curiosity, self-discovery, and connection with others. And in addition to her stories, she's also earned her BA in Classics from the University of Virginia with a concentration in ancient Greek. Then she got her MA in teaching, specifically Latin education. So not only does she love language, she is a writer after all, she loves dead languages. As a Latin teacher, she considers herself a linguistic necromancer. I absolutely love that title. And in her decade of teaching, she got to share her love of Latin and language and literacy devices. If she had to choose a favorite literacy device, it's a tie between metonymy and zeugma. I probably butchered those. I apologize. Now, my guest is focused on her family and writing. She currently lives in Virginia with her husband, two kids, and a dog. His name is Mulder, as in Special Agent Dog Mulder, for any X-File fans out there. And she enjoys gardening, reading, rock climbing, indoor, mostly bouldering, cooking, and baking when not writing. And in this interview, we're going to be talking about her most recent book, The Goddess Games. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, author Erica Rue. Erica, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
And thank you so much for inviting me.
Awesome, Erica. So before we dive into the Goddess Games, is there anything else you'd like to share with our viewers and listeners? Anything that wasn't mentioned in the introduction?
No, I think that about sums it up right now.
All right. So, for those that haven't heard of the Goddess Games until now, what can you give us as a brief teaser or introduction into this story?
So the tagline I like to use for this book is 60 contestants, one charming prince, and a woman desperate to change her stars. And it's sort of like The Selection, but in space, or a mix of The Selection by Kira Cass and Qualify by Vera Nazarian. And it takes mostly place on a spaceship. So it's got sci-fi vibes. It's a YA science fantasy romance. So it's got sci-fi vibes, but it's also, got those fantasy vibes too. It's not hard science fiction or anything like that.
Fascinating. So I'm really intrigued to learn more of the Goddess Games, but let's go back in time for you to learn a little bit more about you, Erica. So, would you say that growing up you were always a creative person, a very imaginative person, or did that come about later in life?
I would say I was probably always an imaginative person. As a little kid, I used to like to pretend that I was an Amazon warrior or a fairy or a witch or stuff like that, where you've got, magical powers or you're stronger, usually like sort of, I guess, strong women in mythology and fantasy and fairy tale. But I've always written. Even in elementary school, I would carry around a little notebook with me and write stories down. I wrote a couple of plays, very bad plays based on fairy tales. I remember my third grade teacher let us perform one in class, which was very kind of her. But yeah, I've always loved writing and loved sort of capturing the world around me in words. So.
Awesome. Now, in your bio, from what it tells me that, as you said, you've been writing a lot, you've been very creative and in writing these stories, which I absolutely love. So, going forward in your own history, when was your aha moment when you realized that you want to transform your passion for writing and actually bring it into the physical world with the Goddess Games?
Um, so the Goddess Games is not my first book.
Okay.
My first series is like a YA sci-fi adventure. And that sort of came into being. I graduated college, I got a job teaching, and I sort of felt like something was missing. I didn't have that creative outlet anymore, and I needed it. So I started writing again. I started with short stories, and then I worked up to novels. And then, so how did I decide I wanted to write the Goddess Games? When I read The Selection by Kira Cass, which was sort of the original inspiration for this, it was an escape in a time that I just needed an escape. It was something light and romantic and fun, and I thought I really enjoyed reading this. I really enjoyed, that maybe it's a little silly that there's a contest to marry a prince, but I decided that I would take those tropes and make them into a story that was more mine. So the Goddess Games has Greek mythology as an inspiration.
Ooh.
I've always been really interested in the idea of Atlantis and different ideas of Atlantis and that myth. So I wanted to incorporate that. And then obviously I love sci-fi. So I'm like, well, I'm gonna have it on a spaceship. Like, we're just gonna do, like any idea, but in space. That's kind of one of the things that I like to do when I'm brainstorming ideas. So I wanted to create that sort of escape feeling in my own book, and sort of maybe provide that to other people who might need it.
That's incredible, and I absolutely love that. And I love going back to your bio again, that you view yourself as a linguistic necromancer. So I'm curious, in your previous writings and now in the Goddess Games, are you able to showcase that in your work? Do you have like your own language that you developed, or do you have, a established language, let's say Greek or Roman or Latin, but it has its own unique spin that fits in your stories?
So Latin and Greek will always find their way into my stories. A lot of times it's character names, or in my first series, creature names, because the Capos Chronicles is based, there's a lot of like genetically engineered creatures. But for example, in the Goddess Games, the prince, who, he's not a morally gray hero. I know that's really in right now. But I really liked, like the good guy heroes. So his last name is Agathon, which means good. The main character's name is Chloe, or Chloe. But in ancient Greek, Chloe is like the first green shoot in spring. And so part of the book is she's looking for a fresh start. So like a woman desperate to change her stars. She's sort of lost opportunities on Earth, and that's why she enters this contest to marry a prince, so that she can. It's not because she wants to marry the prince. It never is when they enter these contests. She just wants a fresh start on Atlantis, which in this it's another planet. But the people, the Atlanteans, are humans. They're humans who were taken from ancient Greece. So they speak Atlantean, which is, it's basically ancient Greek with kind of Latin endings, because my Latin grammar is better than my Greek grammar.
Of course.
So yeah, but there's some other names, and then like cultural artifacts, like if you've heard of things like arete, or it's the other one that plays a big role, xenia. Those concepts in ancient Greece, those play a big role in the Goddess Games as well.
Nice. Okay, now I definitely have to check out this book, because I love anything that has to do with, Greek or Roman. My background as like a classical antiquities, that's my discipline in history. So I absolutely love when, elements of Greek culture and Roman culture are used in storytelling that we don't typically get to see a lot. So I'm really intrigued to see what you've done to add your own spin to it in the Goddess Games. So now let's jump ahead. And we're going to go back to your first books, but also make the connection to your current book, The Goddess Games. So when you decided to begin writing, and going back with your first book and then with Goddess Games now, initially for both times, what were the goals you had as the author when creating those stories, as well as your promise to your future readers?
So for my first series, the Capos Chronicles, which is here's the first one.
Ooh, I like that.
It's a YA sci-fi adventure. There is a romance subplot, but it's not really the focal point. For that one I feel like it's more YA, and I wrote that for kids who were like me, like high schoolers who were like me when I was in high school, I would say. So the main character is like a high achieving student who has like their life planned out, and then there's this field trip that goes wrong, and they're stranded on a planet that shouldn't be there. There's a colony on the planet that shouldn't be there. There are all these genetically engineered creatures that shouldn't be there. And so they have to sort of navigate being lost there. And, by the end of it, it's sort of, I have to make a choice, and I'm not going to be able to live the life that I thought I was going to have. And so I think something that a lot of like high achievers, they feel like unless they're doing something absolutely amazing all of the time, they sort of feel like they're not reaching their potential. And I don't necessarily think that's true. And so I don't know, that was sort of one of the motivations behind that book. And I've lost track of what the question was. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's totally fine. So definitely you answered the first part. And the second part of that question was, when writing the outlines and the first drafts of both of those books in their respective series, what was your promise to your future readers who would pick up these books?
Okay. So I would say, there are a lot of authors who will say, like, I promise my books will always contain this or will never contain that. And I don't know if I can make a promise like that, because I would feel so obligated to keep it. So I guess sort of my promise to readers is that I'm going to write books that I feel passionate about, that I feel strongly about, books that have, meaning to them while still being fun and a little light. It's I'm not writing something dark. I prefer happy endings. I hate killing off characters. I unfortunately do have to kill off characters sometimes, but in writing those stories, that's sort of what I'm keeping for at the forefront of my mind. Just I'm gonna stay true to myself and write stories I love, because I think that there are people out there who will like them, and I think it's important to be true to yourself in that sense. So
Absolutely, and I 100% agree. And you're right. There have been a lot of authors who have said, my book's not going to contain this, my book's going to contain that, and that's fine. Authors have many different reasons for making promises to their readers, but I think ultimately the main promise that I think all of us can agree on is that we want to tell authentic stories that are true to who we are and why we get into this industry. Because at the end of the day, the readers are going to figure out if we're very genuine with our storytelling, or if this is just, as one author put it, just another story that has a different name attached to it. And we're going to be talking about readership and the audience more in the business portion of the interview. But before we get to that, there was a few other questions I wanted to ask you. So now jumping ahead. So after writing, of course, different times, the completed draft of the first book in your series, and then, the God's Games currently, generally speaking, what was the reaction like from friends and family when you told them that you're going down this path? And also, did you do any beta reads for either of your books? And if you did, what was the feedback like? Positive, negative? Maybe not negative, but overtly critical, or somewhere down the middle?
So I get beta feedback for all of my books. for my first series, I don't have comp titles, and I'm still trying to figure out quite how to market it. But some of the feedback I got was like, needs more murder. And I'm like, that's just not what I'm doing. You're probably not my target audience. But a lot of the feedback that I got was generally positive, constructive, helpful, things like, this doesn't make sense, or it's not clear here. There was one piece of feedback that I got for my first series, and it felt like it was too late for me to change it, which was make a different person sort of the main character. And in hindsight, I do think that person was right. I think that it probably would have worked well to do it that way. But because it's third person, multiple POVs, all those characters, like even that character gets lots of POV time. So it's not, it's not like the end of the world. But I think that was, being able to look back on that and say, you know, that was probably advice I should have taken, I think is worth keeping in mind, you know, a little humbling and all of that. And then for the Goddess games, I also got, you know, generally really positive feedback about it. There wasn't as much, I feel like, criticism of that. ARC readers also gave me really positive feedback, which was such a relief, because I was worried, I think, because I hadn't published a book in a few years, and I was like, oh no.
Right.
But again, I was kind of blown away at the positive comments and feedback that I got from readers about the writing and how they really enjoyed the writing and the story as well and the characters.
That's great to hear. And adding on to that, would you say that their feedback, in a way, validated your goals as an author? Going back to what you said, that how you want to present the most authentic story that was, you know, close to who you are and how you approach storytelling.
Yeah. So some of the comments were things like, you know, I loved the mythology twist on these tropes. Some of them were like, you know, the cover and the blurb made this, like, it was exactly what I expected it to be from the cover and the blurb. And so that felt really validating, because I was trying to market this one better and find the right audience for it. And yeah, so I was really pleased to get that positive feedback.
Awesome. And this kind of leads into the first reflective question, which I'm very eager to hear your thoughts on, Erica. And to give a little context to this, you know, as authors, when we create our first stories, it is tied to who we are, because it is a passion project. It is something that we have put a lot of effort in. It's tied to who we are as, you know, as individuals, because we put our heart and soul into this project because we're very passionate about it. And when we make the decision to publish a story, whether self-published or traditionally published or hybrid published, whichever one, there is a sense of anxiety that goes into that decision. And what I mean by that is we are exposing ourselves to the world, in a sense. We are allowing the world to see a fraction of who we are through our writing, and that can be nerve-wracking. That can be intimidating. And for authors, social media is a huge platform for us to showcase our work, to share, to get new followers, to get new readers. It is a big hustle. That is probably the biggest thing that a lot of authors struggle with, is the marketing aspect. But like everything in life, there's always another side to the coin. And in case of social media, it's a double-edged sword, because we do expose ourselves to trolls, to hate, to backlash, anything. There have been authors on this show who told me that some people just left reviews, like one-star reviews, and not given like any feedback to it. And it's just not constructive feedback that is helpful to us. You can be very critical to the story, but still recognize the positive aspects of it. And then there are negative reviews just to be negative. And all that can, you know, overwhelm an author and make us reconsider our choice. And that's when imposter syndrome comes back in the back of everyone's mind, saying that you're not good enough, you're writing in the wrong genre, or you shouldn't be writing at all. So I'm curious, Erica, Throughout your journey as an author, have you ever had those moments of anxiety and imposter syndrome? And if so, what has disciplined you to continue going, to continue writing? Because to you, no matter what life throws at you, you're not going to stop.
Yeah, so I'm gonna, I guess, answer the second part of that question first. Like, why will I
Okay.
not stop writing? Because I don't feel right if I'm not writing. And that's
Mm,
something that I realized once I started back up writing after I graduated college and, was working for a couple of years. I realized once I started writing again that I felt so much better and so much happier when I was creating. And so even if I never published anything again, I would still keep writing. Um,
mm,
but why keep publishing in the face of potential criticism? Um, because there are people out there who do like my writing, and that's something that I especially found with this most recent book, The Goddess Games. There are people out there who are genuinely excited and ready for the next book, and even if it's only a handful of people. I mean, I'm doing this for myself, and I'm also writing for the people who want it. um, I will say that on my first book, The Capos Chronicles, that I did get this review that sort of stuck with me, and it was the title was something like science fiction for women, um, like sci-fi dripping with estrogen, and I was like, I mean, it's YA, it's got several female main characters. Um, I don't think it's dripping with estrogen, but it's not military sci-fi.
mm.
You're not my ideal reader, but the very thought that it shouldn't be that sci-fi shouldn't have like estrogen in it. So this review, because I don't like to bash people who leave negative reviews, but this
Of
review
course.
sort of like lit a fire in me after I got over feeling upset about it, because
Mm.
there is a time period where you read it and you're like, am I crazy? Am I wrong? Um, but after I got over that, it sort of lit this fire in me, and I thought I'm going to write science fiction for women. Not just women, like men will enjoy it too, but the idea that science fiction can have romance in it. Science fiction can have fantasy elements in it. Science fiction doesn't have to be a bunch of space marines, you know, going to war. There's nothing wrong with sci-fi that's very military or whatever. I like military sci-fi too, but just this idea that science fiction, there's only one type, and your YA sci-fi adventure doesn't count. Um, so I've sort of taken that into my mission statement, if you will.
Absolutely. Now, the second part of that, have you ever had experiences of imposter syndrome and anxiety? Because that is, very, very real thing for all authors. And I know people have said before that, oh, it's just a passing thing. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes those moments can be like a nail in the coffin for authors. So, can you tell us, Erica, your experience with it, and what have you learned from that period?
That's a really good point. I do suffer from imposter syndrome. Um, I've written 5 books that I've published. I have drafts of 2 others, so I've clearly written a fair amount, um, and I still feel like I have trouble telling people that I am an author. Uh,
Mm,
it's very difficult for me, and I've been trying really hard. Uh, when people say, "What do you do?" to say, "I'm an author," and people actually respond very positively. But I'm just always afraid that I'm going to get challenged. Like, oh, like you're not a trad author. You don't have a traditional publisher, so you don't count. But I've never experienced that in
mm.
the handful of times that someone has asked and I have answered. It really actually does not come up that often. But yeah, that anxiety, I I feel like having even just a couple of people who are really excited about my book helps with that anxiety, because I don't have to please everybody. I just have to please myself. And then I think that the people who like the book will like will like whatever else I write in the series, hopefully. But if they don't, that's okay too. It's unfortunate because you want them to like, the rest of the series. But
Absolutely.
uh, ultimately, as long as the book is, structurally sound, produced well, um, maybe there's just like a trope or a plot point that they don't like in any book, and it happened to be the one that you included, and someone else loves it. So I think kind of making making the books something that are important to me and writing what I want is kind of a way to alleviate that anxiety. It's like, well, do I love it? If I love it, then, you know, I can feel happy with that. But it's definitely
Absolutely.
hard. I have not had people be mean to me on social media. If I had people like writing mean comments, like or sending me mean messages every day, it would probably be a whole different ball game. But right now,
Mhm.
I'm not receiving any mean comments. So
Well, that's good. That's very, very good to hear, Erica. And now this leads perfectly into the business portion of the interview, the business side of being an author, which is probably one of my favorite segments to talk about. So, as an icebreaker, would you say that for your books that you've gone the direction of an indie author, and looking back, would you have still made a decision to go independent, or would you have gone a different route, say hybrid publishing, or maybe traditional publishing, but going with a small independent publishing house?
um, so I am an indie author, an independent author, and I am pretty happy with that decision.
Mm-hmm.
I I'm not opposed to trad. Like I whatever my next series is, I might try to shop around the first book while I'm writing like the next one. Um, I did technically submit the Goddess Games for a few months, but I pulled it. I got maybe one or two rejections. I think I only submitted it to like 5 agents. And then I don't know if the rest were just like the time had expired or whatever, but I did send an email just in case, pulling it because I wanted to run a Kickstarter
Right.
for the book, and I wanted to hit certain like deadlines. I wanted to publish it before the election because I didn't want to deal with like election dips in sales and stuff. So I wanted to get it out,
Mm.
which is why I pulled it. So I'm definitely like open to trad, but I'm happy being indie. If I weren't indie, um, I'd probably still be rewriting like the first book. But I've learned so much from each book that I have written and published that it's it's something that I don't think I would have done it if I had just been, shopping around that same book, trad. Maybe I would have written one or two books instead of 5+ at this point.
Absolutely. And the reason I bring up, independent publishing houses is, all of us want to go traditional. That's the first thing we want to do, and go to like the big houses. Tor, Ford, Penguin Random House, Simon Schuster, Macmillan, HarperCollins. We all want to go to those. But as I've been doing this now for on YouTube now 3 years, in total 6 years, I've learned from a lot of authors that there is kind of this gatekeeper mentality for the big publishing houses. And I do want to say, from their standpoint, I do understand, because for them, they are a business and they have to look into, okay, what book is going to make us money, what book's going to be marketable. And I completely understand. However, a lot of authors have said that it is very challenging and difficult to get into, traditional publishing for those big houses in particular. But I definitely think it's important to give these small independent houses a chance. I've met a lot of authors who have gone the traditional route, but have gone with small publishing houses who have an established fan base, who've been in business longer, if not the same length of time as these other publishing houses on the East Coast. And ultimately, it's whatever the author chooses. You can
Mhm.
go indie one day for one book series, you can go hybrid or traditional for another, or whichever one you want to do. Ultimately, it's your choice at the very end. And it comes from learning and experience. And that's a big thing, which we'll talk about in this portion of the interview, learning from our experiences. And going forward with that, I also think it's important to know the audience, because our audiences for our books will definitely change. Because, for us, the target audience is us, first and foremost, the authors, because we know the story. However, when we publish our works to an audience, we really have to think of, okay, what audience am I going to market towards? Where does this book fall under? And even when you go into like a different book series, it's the same mentality. It's like, okay, I specialized in this genre of writing for so many years. Now I'm going into this genre, which has its own established audience. How am I going to market towards that? So, Erica, this is another two-parter. So, first and foremost, when you began writing, did you have a good idea of your audience with your first book going forward in time to now, The Goddess Games? And in your opinion, when should an author consider their audience?
Um, so when I started with my first series, I did not really have a strong idea of who my audience was.
Mm.
I was just writing it because it was the story. It was the story of my heart. I feel like a lot of people, their first book, it's the story of their heart. It's the story that they're going to tell. And sometimes that story, if they're really interested in trad, will just get, put in a drawer and will stay there for a really long time, maybe forever. But for me, I went ahead and I published it and I committed to finishing the series. And then for the Goddess Games, I did have more of an audience in mind. I used, tropes and comp titles to sort of figure out who would my audience be, and then how do I market this? Looking at how these other books were marketed, the tropes that people find interesting in them.
Right.
It's definitely challenging, and I'm not going to pretend that I have marketing down by any means.
Mm.
But I definitely think I did a better job with this book than the last series. So. And then what was the second part of the question?
The second part of the question was, in your opinion, when should an author consider their audience in their writing? Before they begin writing the first draft, or before they go about publishing the book?
I mean, I would say think about your audience while writing it, while you're thinking up your ideas. So there's writing to trend, and then there's writing to market. Where market is where you're just trying to hit the expectations of people who like this kind of book. Writing to trend is more you're trying to catch what's hot right now.
Right.
So even if you don't write fast, like I don't write fast, I don't write to trend, but I will attempt to write more to market so that I can advertise it better to the people who might be interested in it. So I think having that in mind from the beginning, as well as I think that now, and this isn't something that I would have said, when I started writing, but I think it's also worthwhile to have visuals in mind when you write. So when you're writing a scene, think about how, like, is this a scene that I might want as character art? And then thinking about how you can make it conducive to that, or if there are any like symbols or anything like that in your story, how you can make them like a useful visual. Because with social media like Instagram, which is where I am mostly, it's so visual that the more you can have visuals in your own head and be able to use those visuals in your posts and promotion, I think that is very valuable. Again, I'm not saying that I'm great at this.
Right.
But again, like Pinterest, having like a Pinterest board just so that you have it in your head and you can easily like conjure up these images or give references to an artist if you happen to hire an artist to do any character art or anything like that, can be very useful.
Absolutely. And also, speaking of, the audience, it's also very important to look at the readership too, because from the audience, you have to think of, okay, who's exactly going to read this book? And as you mentioned before, for the Goddess Games, it's a YA novel. And I'm very curious. I love asking this particular question to YA authors because I'm sure you have seen, Erica, in other books that are geared towards the YA readership or audience, there are certain elements that are more, let's say, new adult or adult that's like, that really doesn't fit well. As what you were mentioning before earlier in the interview, how some people wanted um, more violence or wanted the character to be like a morally gray character, which is like the trend now in the YA. So I'm very curious. When you began writing the Goddess Games and knowing what the market trend was in the YA community, did you consider possibly bumping up the age group to, let's say, new adult or adult fiction? Or did you stick to your guns and say, I'm going to write this book as a YA novel? I understand it's not going to be what everyone expects, but this is the book and the genre that works perfectly.
That's a really good question, and it's something that I did think about and struggle with a bit. I would say that the Goddess Games is upper YA. You could call it new adult, but I feel like with new adult, people expect or they guess there might be more explicit
Mm-hmm.
material in it, and there's really not, like, especially in the first book, there's not really anything explicit.
Right.
I don't plan to write any open door scenes, but I do consider it, warm. There is romance. Like, if I were giving it like on a scale out of 5, I would call it maybe a 1 or
Okay.
a 1.5 for the whole series based on what I have planned.
Right.
But it is a really tough question, and people get really really touchy about it. And some of the books I've read that are YA have more in them than I would expect. So
Mm-hmm.
trying to use, and they're traditionally published, and so trying to sort of gauge like where it will fall, and so using those as sort of an upper limit, um, I think is where I'm going. But I do call this one more of like an upper YA, like if someone were to explicitly ask. But because new adult isn't really a category anywhere where I can, mark it off,
Mm-hmm.
it's a little harder to advertise it as new adult. But my other series I would say is more squarely YA, even though it's more violent, because for some reason violence is more acceptable than sexual content, I guess. At least that's what it seems to be from what people get upset about. Because there is violence in that first series, but it's mostly against aliens that don't look like
Right.
humans. So I don't know.
Absolutely. 100%. And you bring up a lot of good points, especially, with current books now that have all these elements that would fall under new adult and adult fiction. And for those who are watching this right now who don't know what new adult is, it's a new term in the publishing industry where it's kind of like in the middle of YA and adult fiction, like a transition from YA and into adult fiction. It's like that sweet middle ground. Again, it's a very, very new term in the publishing industry. There's not a lot of books that are, classified as NA, as the marketing term. But everything that Erica has just mentioned is, very, very true. How, you know, when we market our own books in the genre that we're most comfortable in, we have to understand that people have an expectation of what these books are going to be like, whether you're writing in like romance fantasy or romance fantasy in general, that's been dominating the publishing industry. If you go into the fantasy genre, people are going to expect, is there going to be romance in it? And your story may have romance in it, but it doesn't classify as a romance fantasy novel or romancity. Finally, I got to say that correctly. But other than that, you can go on a whole discussion about, you know, the different publishing trends and everything. But ultimately, that leads to a very important question, which, Erica, I'm very eager to hear your thoughts on. So I'll give context to this question. So a year ago, I had on the show an author by the name of Eric Bowden. Shout out to Eric. Thank you again for this amazing question. And the original question was, you know, what were the authors or books that inspired you and helped you create your author voice? And he gave me all of his examples, but he added more details to his question. And it was this: I could give you everything. I could give you all the authors, all the books. At the end of the day, my book is going to be me because that's what the readers are going to pick up. I'm not trying to be like so and so. I'm not trying to write like so and so. And that is, you know, a very difficult thing to do as authors among the many things. And he gave another example. As readers, because authors are also readers, we have seen books that have had the tagline, so and so meets so and so. I'll give a book for me that I've read that has this tagline is the Dinosaur Princess series by the late Victor Milan that had the tagline Game of Thrones meets Jurassic Park. Instantly, that's going to grab anyone's attention. Even if you've never read the books, but have seen the film or TV adaptation, you automatically know what to expect. And for a reader, that's great. You've achieved your job. But as an author, that's not really good for us because it blocks us, or rather puts us in a box of a style of writing or a style of storytelling or anything else that puts us in these little check boxes. And as authors, we shouldn't be restricted to just writing one style of book or be known as, oh no, I'm a fantasy author or a thriller author or an action adventure author. Now, as I said before, you can have your preferences that you feel comfortable with, but you shouldn't be restricted to just that genre or that style of writing. You can go cross genre and really see where you shine and also surprise your readers. So ultimately, Erica, here is the question. From your first book series to the Goddess Games, how have you been able to balance this scale with one having your individuality as an author and the other having the reverence and respect to the authors and books you've grown up with who have inspired you in some way?
So I feel like that's kind of a hard question. um, I mean, my goal is always to write books that are mine, that have the unique parts of my personality or interests in them. So my first series is very biology heavy. The genetically engineered creatures in it are based off of real animals in our world that, you know, you just kind of like put like a little sci-fi suit on them and zip it up. And so I guess like in terms of my writing voice and writing style, I've definitely I was definitely influenced while writing that first series pretty heavily by the voice of some of the books that I was reading. And sometimes I'll write some like a short piece in a style that I'm really interested in, but ultimately I can't mask what my voice is. So I think it's not something where I have to really try to write in my voice. All of these things that I read get combined into my voice, hopefully in a non-obtrusive way. But that's something where pretty much everything I read, I find something where I think, you know, I want to pull, like, I want to write like that, or I want to write like this, or I want to have characters with who make me feel this way. I want to have world building that uses this. And then ultimately, because I'm pulling little bits from so many places, it doesn't seem like I'm taking something so fully from someone else. I mean, I definitely took, you know, tropes and plot points from the selection, but at the same time, I just don't think that anybody who reads like my book and the selection will think this is just a cheap knockoff or whatever. I feel like my book is different enough and it's me enough that it's its own take on the trope. So I think that's maybe how I do it, how I balance the influences around me with who I am and my author voice.
Absolutely. And that is very, very true. And I think, as authors, we're always going to be inspired by things that we've read. And something that I like to call the 3 E's: educate, entertain, and enlighten. Of course, we want to entertain our readers. That's the main goal. But with storytelling, you can educate as well and enlighten. And that comes with, a lot of trial and error and really honing our craft. And honing one's craft is something that is probably the biggest discussion in the publishing industry. And what I mean by that is after doing, podcasting now and interviewing authors for now almost a little over 6 years now, I've come to realize that for all of us in this industry, there are 2 paths. One path is to be an author, dedicated to the art of storytelling and crafting a narrative, not solely being motivated by capital. But let's be honest, in this industry, it's nice to get a little bit of money here and there. The other path, the one that gains the most attention, is to be known as an author. And that is an individual who's dedicated to marketing, going on shows like this, promoting their work on social media, going to book signing events, whatever it is to get their name out there. Now, both paths have their own hurdles and expectations. But definitely for first-time authors getting into this industry, the second path is the most enticing and the one that everyone goes to. But that leads to a lot of unrealistic expectations and goals. And I think you can definitely agree, Erica, that in this industry, whether you're hybrid, indie, or traditional, it's not a get-rich-quick money scheme. It's really, really not. And another hard truth is that there is no guarantee your first book is going to be an overnight success. It's ultimately a hard pill to swallow, but it is true. Now, there are exceptions to that, of course. There are many authors whose first book were overnight success, who did give them the status and recognition. That is a huge thing to do and not an easy thing to do. But generally speaking, you have these highs and lows in the publishing industry for authors who try to make this their career and they burn out, they lose their passion for writing, or they write for trends. They write for what's happening in the publishing world. And their writing becomes very, what's the word I'm thinking of? Very factory like, very non organic, that it's just writing that's similar to someone else's book in the sense that it flows the same way or it's beat for beat another book. And your readers are going to recognize that. They're going to see there is a difference in how you approach storytelling in that book to one that you've put your heart and soul into. So, Erica, I turn over to you to add your thoughts to this discussion that while, yes, there is no guarantee in this industry your book will be an overnight success, it shouldn't stop you from being an author if creating stories is something you're truly passionate about.
I would agree with that last statement. I there was a point where I wanted to be a full-time writer and I wanted to be able to like quit my job and make tons of money for my books. And then I sort of reached a point where I'm like, that would put a lot of stress on me and the creative process. And I don't want to do that anymore. I did end up quitting my job for different reasons. And now I'm like staying at home with my kids and stuff like that. So it was unrelated to being an author. So basically I'm part-time. I get a couple days a week where I can, focus and write. And then the rest of it is my family. But I think that it's important for people to, like, if you want to write, and it's because you have that passion for writing and you can't imagine doing anything else, then it's very possible that it's not going to be something where you can quit and become a full-time author and make an income that you can live off of. People definitely do it, but for me, that would have just created too much stress. I would have felt really pressured to write things differently than I think I do now. That's not to say that people who write to trend, don't love their books and don't love what they're putting out. They've just mastered a different set of skills than what I have, and I'm happy, sitting here working on my craft, writing maybe 1 or 2 books a year, and that's about what I can do.
Absolutely, 100%. And also to add to the discussion, while your first book may not give you the success, it's a stepping stone, your foot in the door. And that's what it should be seen as, because we get better as time goes on, because grit transforms into talent. It may be your 5th, 7th, 10th, or your 20th book that really gets your name out there. And that's okay, because then you can say, if you enjoyed this book, check out the other ones before that to see my journey. And that is how you create, in between those books, your brand as an author. Because that's another thing that is very important to discuss, is branding and marketing, as well as networking. That's a big thing in the publishing community, and social media has been a huge support of that, especially on Instagram. I have met actually a majority of my authors that I've had on the show for the last 3 years now have all come from Instagram. It's insane, but they are some of the most amazing individuals I have ever met. So for Erica, is there anyone you would like to give a personal shout out to, either a friend or a fellow author you've connected with on social media, who has really helped you understand the industry much better, or just been by your side and been your biggest cheerleader for you on this journey?
So this might be kind of cheating, but I would say Stephanie Moreau, because I met her in real life. We were originally in the same writing group, but then she moved away, and we just sort of stay in vague touch, through social media or email or whatever. And we started out sort of kind of like at the same place. Like we were both like publishing our first books around the same time. And she has published way more than I have. And she did a Kickstarter, and she's the reason that I did my Kickstarter to do like my special edition of my book. I'm sure this is beautiful.
Ooh, that is very nice.
It's like fancy insides, right?
Oh,
and so, like,
that is nice.
I would not have a beautiful version of my book like this if it weren't for her. Sorry. And she's just watching her like try new things and go outside her comfort zone has been a real inspiration to me. And she writes urban fantasy, so it's sort of like a little different. But she was also a classics major, which was kind of a fun little thing. So yeah, Stephanie Moreau is probably one of those people that I would say.
Awesome. I don't think I've heard of has she published any books that I may know? Is she on like Instagram? People can go and check her out.
Yeah, she's on Instagram. She's published. She's working on, I think, her like 4th series now. Her most recent one is Siren's Secret, I think, is the first name. But her last Phoenix series is it's like a 7-book series that I think was her most popular one so far. So it's Stephanie with a PH, and then Miro, Mirro. And so she's great. I enjoy her books too, obviously. But,
awesome. Yeah. I have to go and check her out and check out her stuff. And I'm glad you have that amazing connection with her, because I definitely think, as indie authors, people tend to think that this industry is very cutthroat, and there may be some truth to it, but ultimately we're all trying to help one another, trying to be successful. And while some people say that there may not be a strong connection between us authors, whether we're independent, hybrid, or traditional, at the end of the day, we're all in the same boat. We're all trying to get our stories out there, and we're learning from one another. We're
Yeah.
learning new skills. We're learning new ways to approach certain aspects of the industry, whether that's marketing, whether that's crafting a series, or whether that's making an amazing sequel that's better than the first, whatever it is. And that is what I love so much about the publishing industry, that it is this camaraderie, this band of brothers and sisters, you can say, that it's just a very amazing thing. And I've learned so much from the many authors that
Yeah.
I've met. So here's the final question, Erica. Everything you've learned thus far in your journey as an author, from the highs and the lows, what is your word of wisdom to fellow authors out there who want to get their foot in the door?
Um, so I would say my best bit of advice, and I'm stealing this from Becca Syme, who are you familiar with her?
I've heard the name. I've heard the name.
Okay, so she does like, Strengths for Writers, Write Better Faster Academy, and her sort of catchphrase is question the premise, which basically means anytime you get, writing advice, question it. Like, does this actually work for me? So things like never use adverbs. Don't you could you can't edit a blank page. It's like, but can you? Or a first draft only has to exist. Does it? Because some of the conventional wisdom made me feel like I was doing something wrong or messed up, because it doesn't always resonate with me, but everybody says it, and people just repeat it. So always ask yourself, anytime anybody is giving you writing advice, like, does this resonate with me? Does this work for me? Have I tried this and it didn't work, so maybe I should ignore it? So that's coming from her, but it's something that has been extremely liberating for me as a writer, to sort of embrace the whole question the premise. Like, do I need this piece of advice? Does it work for me, or does it not work for me? And then going from there.
That is probably an amazing piece of advice, Erica. And
She's
with
brilliant.
it's true. It really is true. Question the premise. If this works for you, great. If it doesn't, then that's also okay. There's a lot of other great pieces of advice out there. And as we talked about in this interview, um, use what works best for you, because no one's going to write a story that you want to write better than you. And with that being said, viewers and listeners, we arrive at the end of this amazing author's interview here on the channel. A huge thank you to Erica Rue for making her official debut here on the show. Erica, thank you so much for being here. And where can people follow you on social media, as well as purchase a copy of the Goddess Games and your first book that you wrote?
So thank you so much for having me. I'm most active on Instagram. It's Erica Rue Author is my handle. And then for where you can find my books, right now my books are just available on Amazon, and you can find them there under Erica Rue. Yeah.
Awesome. And do you have an author's website for people to check out as well?
I do. So my website is ericarue.com. So pretty easy.
Awesome. I'll link all that down below in the description of this video. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another amazing author interview here on the channel. A huge thank you to Erica for making her official debut on the show. We wish her the very best with the Goddess Games and any other books she has slated for this year or the years after. And as always, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And as always, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out, wishing you a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world.